Hello and welcome. Welcome to the channel. Today we are with Sal. Hello, Sal. Now, Sal reached out to me after I did the interview with Richard Vobes, and he said, "I think we've got things to talk about." So we arranged a get together, and that's what we're here to do. So I really don't have any idea. I've looked at Sal's channel. I've watched some of his videos, but we're gonna start as though I know nothing. Sal, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Um, well, like you, um, I am a sort of channel for information that comes, shall we say, from the beyond.
Okay.
Uh, Funnily enough, the other day someone queried me and they wanted me to give some sort of explanation. And I had to think about that. And you know what? I'm digressing. Let me just stay on focus. So me, what am I? These days, I am a semi-retired kinesiologist.
Okay, super.
Uh, and what brought me to this place has been um, intense pain and suffering throughout my life,
Right.
which has become, I laugh at it now, but I see it as a necessary step towards reaching um, speed velocity to escape the confines of the ego.
Okay.
Because without the intensity of emotional expression and the intensity of feeling and the intensity of holding various mental opposing beliefs and concepts, unless we go through that struggle, we can never escape the limitations of the prison, self-imposed prison, which is our egos. I have nothing wrong. I have nothing against ego. I love my ego. But we need to be free of it. We need to be the masters of our egos rather than the slaves of our egos. And so my life has been one of intense suffering till I reach a point when I could let it all go.
Okay.
That's it in a nutshell,
All
really.
right. Okay. And at what point were you able to because how old are you now? Because didn't I hear you
I'm I am 69. I'm on my way to 70. I'm nearly
70?
70. On
Super.
my way to 70.
And when were you able to let go of all of this intense suffering?
Well, it was a long story in the sense that I became involved with the Gurdjieff group when I was 19,
Hmm.
and that became a strong focus for me for quite a few years. And then I moved on to spiritual healing. And then from that, I moved on to becoming an acupuncturist, no, a Gestalt psychotherapist,
Oh yeah.
and then an acupuncturist, and so on and so forth. Always looking for ways of healing myself. Because throughout all of that, there was something deep within me which I hadn't been able to resolve. So all the time I was chipping away to open up my heart. And that was a long term process. I mean, I couldn't even be a spiritual healer. I tried to be one, but every time I opened myself up to connect with the energy, I couldn't stop crying.
All
There
right.
was so much suppressed emotion within me that I couldn't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah.
And so it was a lifelong search. So I did all manner of things, always hoping to open up my heart more and more and more. But I was never good enough. And it wasn't until I was 60 when I finally understood what was holding me back, which was my mother. Well, you see, that's a blame. That's what happens when we're victims. We blame someone else. But it wasn't my mother, it was me blaming my mother
Pause.
for my childhood.
Yeah.
And all that suppressed anger and all that grief behind that, until I punctured that bubble, until I experienced fully the intensity of my loss.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
However, once I did that, the world of healing opened to me in a way which it had never done before. And I learned how to do kinesiology. And it turned out that everything that I had been taught to do with kinesiology, I had already done for years and years before. All the different facets, the structural, the craniosacral, the acupuncture, the nutrition. I'd done all these things, but now with kinesiology, I had a new way of approaching it. But even that was just the beginning, because as I did kinesiology with people through muscle testing, I began to realize that there was an intelligence behind my relationship with this person. I was asking questions, and sometimes what I was saying was not what I was saying in my mind. My intention was different from the words. The words were coming automatically, but my intention was different. However, this, whatever it was responding not to my words through the client, but to my intention, to my images. So I became suspicious, and gradually I began to realize, oh, hello, there's something else going on here. And gradually a conversation began. And I thought, right, I need, so I had some friends who were willing to be guinea pigs for me to have this conversation. And this conversation said, you have to write a book. Okay. I've never written anything in my life. So I took, I did it, and I wrote a book, and it was the beginning of my learning how to write. And I'm still learning. It's a long process. However, the writing became a way of communicating more and more with this intelligence, so that I would ask questions and I would get answers, and then I would write my articles. But that was only part of it, because in the process, you know how people use a pendulum to get information. So they're using their body to separate their ego from something deeper within. Well, I learned to do this, but with my hands. So I would do self-muscle testing. Okay? Yes, no answers. You speak about this yourself, how you used to do something like that. And I then began to use this in earnest. And it took a while to really become proficient. And so then I used this in my meditations to improve my communication with this. So this, whatever it is, I called it Charlie. So I got to a point when I thought, I've got to give this a name, because this fathomless intelligence, I'm just a little ego here. I need to relate to something. So I called him Charlie. Of course, he's not a man, he's not a woman, he's nothing. But so I called him Charlie. And gradually I began to piece together the structure of creation within the, we're very limited beings. We cannot truly understand creation. But within my limited perspective, Charlie began to divulge information to me so that I would gradually understand more and more and more the nature of creation as Charlie described it to me. And so anyway, so we were doing the meditations, and he began to tell me how to heal myself. Because as part of my reaching speed velocity to escape, I had made myself very sick. Other people had made me very sick. And I was in a bad way. I'd reached a point in which I was in a bad way. By now it was just physical, because I dealt with the issue to do with my mother. I had forgiven her. I had opened up to her. I dealt with her death. And I was totally fine with that part of my psyche. but physically I still had all the residue from the past. And Charlie began to heal me. And this really is how I truly began to know that he was real, because he was telling me what to do, how to heal myself. And then I thought, well, I could use this with clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to experiment. And rather than do muscle testing with them, I would just sit and I would just ask the questions, yes, no, do you need structural? Do you need emotional? What is it you need? And then, so I developed a language of delving deeper and deeper and deeper through yes, no questions as to what does this person actually need?
Okay.
So it's gotten to the point where I can do it really fast. And, I get images, I get information, but I never take that for granted. I would always double check with my yes, no answers. And I will double check and I will triple check, because it is an unfortunate reality of being a human being that we're born into this world, which is a damaged world, and we're damaged by the world. And even once we have actually managed to escape the confines of the ego, we are still ego and we're still subject to ego. And we will never escape ego, because that we're never meant to escape ego. We're simply meant to love our egos. We're meant to be one with our egos. But even that, we're fallible, we're damaged. So I find occasionally my mind wanders. So I start thinking about something else. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, whatever. And occasionally I lose the plot. So I'll get words, I'll get images, but I will never trust them until I double and triple check them.
Okay.
Because the one thing we must not do is take ourselves for granted. Simply because we're channels to something greater than us, we're still egos, and we need to own up to our weaknesses in that scope. So anyway, so that's me. That's where I am. Tell me about you.
Okay. Well, a lot of what you said obviously resonates with me. I know you listened to what I was talking about with Richard. But what's interesting is because I've been working on therapy for, I don't know, the last 15 years. I've been helping people with therapy. I've been using hypnotherapy. And what I'm aware of is that when I go into, when you go take somebody into hypnosis, you go into hypnosis with them. And my guess is that when you are working with your client, you're pretty much going in where they are as well, to connect or whatever. But what I find is that I get lots of times I don't know what I'm going to say in hypnosis, and I just stream what comes to me. I'm kind of given what this client needs to hear. And sometimes I'm surprised at what I say, because I think, well, that wasn't necessarily what I imagine the client needs. But quite often they'll say at the end, wow, that was really powerful that you said that. So I think, this kind of process of being streaming information, channeling information, if you want to call it that, is, I think more and more of us are doing that. I think we're in the age where it's time. That the veil is thinning. They want to get messages through, and they want us to start to change, I suppose, change what the situation is, with whatever skills we've got. I mean, you've obviously, when you look back at your life, isn't it, you kind of see, I know why I did all of this now to lead me to this place. Without all of that information, it would have been harder to get here, Yeah. So,
for sure.
What was because you were talking about the pain and everything that you went through. Are you talking about emotional pain or physical as well?
Well, the physical came later. Well, actually, no, there's always been physical, but basically my mother put me in an orphanage at the age of 3.
Right.
And that was, my world just went bland, and but I found a nun there who really took a shine to me, so Rusty. And she was like a second mother. She became my mother, apart from the fact that there were 100 other kids all roping around her at the same time. But she and I did have a special relationship. And I hadn't realized this at the time because I totally switched her off later on.
Right.
And when I was 8, usually when you're 7, they transfer you from the orphanage with the nuns to an orphanage with the priests. But she kept me there an extra year, so I became the head acolyte. That was the only way I could stay an extra year with her. She didn't, she didn't want to leave me, but it is as it is. But she hung on to me as long as she could.
Yeah.
But once I went to the priests, I was dead. I was totally emotionally numb then. I mean, like the 3 years old, that was the first one, but the second one was just too much. And I was completely emotionally dead. And so my life really was about reclaiming my connection with my heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the physical problems arose because I went to acupuncturists who made me worse, and because I was eating too many sugars, too many carbs, fatty liver disease. So there was a whole variety of things, and it all combined. And I spent a lifetime trying to fix myself. And when I became an acupuncturist, I was forever interfering with my body, and I made myself worse. And then I went to others who didn't understand, and they made me worse. I mean, I won't go into too much of that. But by the time I was 60, I was a physical wreck.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so although I then dealt with the emotional side of it, but in a way, you see, you could argue that the physical was simply the reflection of my internal emotional disturbances.
For sure.
Take your pick.
Yeah.
But I dealt with the emotional, but now my physical needed healing. And people were not able to heal me because I went quite a few and they made me worse and worse. They didn't have the skill. They didn't have what it takes to heal me. Because frankly, there's very few human beings that can truly heal another human being. Because ego cannot truly heal ego.
Sure.
We don't have enough resources. We cannot put ourselves deep inside the other person. We just don't have we don't have enough of whatever's required to understand what's really going on. But Charlie could, and Charlie did, and Charlie healed me. And now I'm great. Thank you very much.
And you look great as well. You look great. I mean, for 69, you've got a tremendous energy about you. Can I ask you, so the advice, just talking about your healing first, and then we'll talk about the work you do with others. Yeah. Did Charlie give you advice on diet and other things, or what was the areas that you were given advice on?
Okay, when I get a client, this is my approach. This is how, first of all, I connect, I engage, and then I double check that I am connected. And I tell you how I connect. We all, in theory, we all have access to our hearts, but few people do have access to their hearts for any particular length of time, because the emotional blockages are too great and they interfere, and we need to protect ourselves. However, when we open up into our hearts, what we first of all connect with is the soul fragment within us. Every human being, every animal, every plant, everything has got a soul fragment. And so my soul fragment, I call Eric, because you got to give these things a name otherwise.
Right, Eric now.
So my soul fragment, I call Eric. And Eric is itself a soul fragment. Eric is a soul fragment of the body of Eric, but the body of Eric itself is a fragment because little bits of Eric are spread across different timelines in the past.
Okay.
So if you put all the bits of Eric together from all the past timelines, then you would have Eric.
Mm-hmm.
So today, there's a soul fragment that operates with me, which I call Eric, but this is just a fraction of Eric, because the other fractions, you would call them past lives.
Okay.
Okay. So together, we've got Eric. Now, Eric itself is a fragment of Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie is the one that I communicate with, but I communicate with Charlie via Eric, because I cannot communicate directly with Charlie. Most people who channel, what they've done is they're communicating with the equivalent of Eric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is with that fragment, soul fragment, who has access to information about the past and can connect to other people to some extent. Charlie goes one step beyond, and he himself is a soul fragment in another planet, or in another planetary body.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as I'm concerned, he is a whole. Charlie is whole, and Eric is a fragment of. So that's the essence of it. So when I communicate for healing purposes, I first of all communicate with Eric, make sure I am there with Eric, and then I ask, is Charlie there? Yeah, then Charlie says, yeah, I'm here. So we're all here. Thank you very much. Let's move on. Willing to do this. So now I focus on the other person. So then this is what I ask. I said, well, what do you need? Do you need any structural work? Do you need any nutritional or dietary advice? Do you need any tissue salts, backflower remedies, homeopathy? And if they do need any of that, then that's a separate story, and Charlie will get me to isolate and identify what it is they exactly need. Then I'll say, do you need any emotional work? And then I will say, do you need any acupuncture, any energetics? So again, energetics can mean often it applies to the chakras.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a blockage in a chakra, one or two chakras may be blocked, and then we will deal with that. What I tend to do a lot of is acupressure, and it really, really is so much more powerful than when I used to do acupuncture. And it's like really, really precise. But anyway, so that's, in essence, that's what I do. And that encompasses pretty much everything about the human being. Now, the emotional, you might find this of interest. I don't have it here at the moment. It is on my website. So in the beginning, when I learned kinesiology, I was exposed to levels of consciousness, which is a chart of different levels from 0 up to 1,000. And I started working with that to do with emotions. But I thought that was business at the time. But then the guy who'd done this, he died, and his children, they took over it, and now they wanted to monetize his books and levels of consciousness. And they sent me a letter, cease and desist, stop promoting this, don't put the chart out. So I said, okay, even though I was putting a link so that people could go to them and pay for the chart. But
yeah,
fair enough. So I asked Charlie, what do I do? How am I? And he said, don't worry, we're going to do our own. So then Charlie and we created a new chart, which is 100 times better than the initial levels of consciousness, because the initial level of consciousness is actually incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so with this new chart, what we did was that we separated it into percentages. And it turns out that below 2%, so what this is ego-soul integration, basically ego-soul integration. How much integration is there between my ego and my soul fragment?
Mhm.
So the less integration there is, the lower the percentage. Basically, the more we're lost in our egos. So anything below 20%, and you're fucked. Sorry, that was a little bit sort of
That's okay. We swear on this channel. Yeah.
Basically, below 20%, you're totally into yourself. You're lost. You're totally lost in your ego.
Yeah.
You're lost in your pains. You're just nothing. But once you start to climb above that, you begin to have moments of separation. You begin to see yourself objectively, a little bit at a time. And so gradually, as you begin to work through your emotional suppressed tensions and your mental belief systems, so we begin to climb. And as we climb that ladder of soul integration, so we get to a point when we now are beginning to get the information from beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that usually begins at around 55%. So you have to be at least 55% to begin to get that information from beyond. Most people, according to Charlie, 98% of the world population is beneath 20%.
That's not good.
Which is not good enough. But we're here to change that, right?
Yeah.
The people who are between 20 and 50, it's such as, well, 98%, you work it out, with 98%, we're talking millions, we're not talking billions. It's such a small proportion of people. However, the reason why we're sharing that, so on that database of percentages of ego soul integration, you will notice that right at the bottom, it says 2%.
Mm-hmm.
So 2%, if I'm with someone and we're doing an emotional session, what I do is I say, okay, what is your present level? And how high are you willing to go from your present level? And then what is holding you back? So invariably, what's holding the person back is somewhere between, more often than not, it's around 10 to 15%, which is little parts of your personality which have got stuck. There is emotions there which have not been dealt with, that have not been expressed, but not exclusively. It depends on the person's level. But occasionally, that person's level is below 2%. And then I know that what we have to deal with is emotions from a past life.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So then I asked Charlie, you see, I do it different from hypnotherapy. So then I asked Charlie, when are we talking about? How many years ago? 100 to 100, 1,000? So I will then go back in time, and via Charlie, I identify which part of the world, how old the person was, their state, male, female, single, married, children, whatever, the event. And invariably, the important thing is to identify, and I have to say that this, for me, this now becomes a little bit like what you're describing when you're in a sort of hypnotherapy session, whereby Charlie and I are one. So I'm still relying on the muscle testing to confirm, but I'm now getting the images and the information, and so I'm now seeing things, and I'm even hearing things, but I will still double check. And so we identify the moment of what is the emotion, and then we go to the point of death. Mm-hmm. Because the problem that human beings have, but you can't go there till you're ready. The problem that human beings have is that previous soul fragments they have become fragmentized.
Yeah.
Because that person has died in a trauma. They have died in a place where their ego is so convoluted and stuck within themselves that there's no connection with their heart. And so that fragment, the person dies, and the soul fragment, which is bound with that ego, is lost in a way. But it's all present time, you see, because the past, the present, it's all now. And so in the present moment, my client goes back and they identify with the emotions of what was going on then. And I get them to forgive, and I get them to really connect lovingly with that past incarnation, so that they die consciously.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is how we bring all the little parts of ourselves together, not just in this lifetime, because our personalities are fragmented. Yeah, we've got so many different parts of ourselves which the left doesn't know what the right is thinking, and all of that is because of emotions that have not been expressed, released, and let go. And so there's this process of bringing together in this lifetime, and then bringing the past into the present so that we let that go. And invariably, when I do these works with people, those powerful emotions in the past, which were not expressed, acknowledged, they're the same as the present.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that, in a very odd way, they release the past and they come to the present, and now they're able to release the present.
Interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating because what you've described exactly the process that I'm familiar with, just in very different, well, not very different language, but in a different way, but exactly the same. I mean, the whole process that when I take people through past life, my suggestion is always, before we even start, your higher self, your unconscious mind knows exactly which life you need to go to, because that's the life that needs to be healed. And then we do the same. We take them to the last day of the life. They have to pass through that, as you say, consciously, and then they heal that life, and the forgive that life, and they forgive themselves and everything. And that creates that, kind of, then they can learn from that life, because until that life's healed, it's not of any value to them. And so in a metaphoric way, what you're saying about this fragment being almost held there, through the act of forgiveness, you become united again, one. So, I mean, the parallels are incredible, but you've obviously described it in a very different way, which is really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. So
so ultimately,
go on, carry on.
well, I was just going to say that ultimately, what you and I do, if we forget the different perspectives, is we're helping people to connect with their hearts, come back to their heart, to feeling, because that is the only, the world as it is at the moment is in such a terrible state. And the only way forward is for people to connect with their hearts. Sure. And I don't mean just being lovey-dovey with everybody, but to connect with our hearts is to love ourselves.
Sure.
In a nutshell.
Sure. As you mentioned about your experience of really having to heal the past and heal the experience, I don't do a lot of past life regressions now. I had a period of time where for like 2 years there was solid nonstop. I learned such a lot, but most of my work is based on helping people to heal the wounds of their childhood, because that's when the damage is done. When children are born, they're in very deep hypnosis, altered state, and that's where the damage is done. So if you've got 12 good years, the first 12 years, if they're great, super duper. But if they're not, if you had problems, like 80%, 90% of us, then we have stuff to deal with. And one of the techniques that I use is called Heal the Child. And it's again, it's what you're describing, which is going back and releasing that emotion. Because we can be okay. We can say, hey, I'm over that now. You know, I'm sorted, but there's an emotion that's in the past there, that just like in a past life, the same thing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, very good. So how you know, what's your week like in terms of clients? Do you have a lot of clients? Or you're building your client base? How does that go?
I'm 69 years old. No, all right. So from the point of view of Charlie, um, he describes me as a messenger, but
Yeah.
I'm not the only one. You know, I mean, there's thousands of messengers out there. I'm not the only one. Um, but I'm a messenger, um, very much from the point of view of healing.
Hmm.
I mean, there's many times, some of them, they're political messengers. You know, if you take someone like David Icke, you know, he's a political messenger.
Sure.
So there are many different sorts of
Sure,
messengers.
sure. Yeah.
Some messengers that, you know, you talked about, you are Jehovah's Witness, right? So within the Christian faith, there are messengers there who talk about the ascension, yeah, the rapture. So there, there are many messengers, but not all messengers are the full shilling. Okay, that's a little. What I mean by this is that, you know, like if you focus on Jesus Christ, if you focus on the love of Jesus, yeah, and that can be a vehicle towards opening your heart, towards, you know, you focus on loving Jesus, and you know that can really speed you forward up to a certain level. You're still limited by belief systems, but it takes you forward to a certain level, and perhaps that will then really truly bring you into a true loving place, as long as you not just love Jesus, but you love yourself and you accept Jesus' love for you. If you can have that I love you, you love me bit, and you're fine with that, you're great.
Mhm.
But so these Christian people, they've now opened up, so they've now reached that level where they're now beginning to get communication, and their intuition is opened up, their imagination's opened up, and because their ego is all to do with the Christian belief system of creation, then whatever comes through is going to be seen in those terms.
Mhm.
They can't help it, you know, because that's the only experience they have. You know, whatever comes through has got to be filtered through our consciousness. And if our consciousness is full of crap, then there's going to be crappy stuff coming out. So I'm not saying that there's going to be crap there, but I'm just making the point that a channel is only as good as the clarity of our subconscious.
For sure.
And so they see it in those terms of the rapture, etc. So anyway, so they're seeing part of the truth, but it's not necessarily the whole truth.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you can see this with all manner of channels out there. They, you know, I've experienced quite a few, and they all have fragments of the truth. And I can see the truth, but I can also see the limitation of the personality coloring that truth.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, so Charlie, he's put me here as a channel, sort of channel, because I question the truth that Charlie gives to me, and I double check it. Because no, I don't question Charlie's truth. I question my ability to receive the truth
Sure.
clearly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
So what Charlie says to me is that something is coming. I write about this in my website. He's told me about all this.
Uh-huh.
Something is coming, and that we have to help people to open up into their hearts. But now we need to actually speed this up. There's now nearly 8 billion people on this earth, and the time has come for all of us who are opening up in this way to begin to seriously work with people to open up their hearts so that their level of soul integration increases.
Mhm.
And there is a minimum, and don't quote me on this, but I think the minimum is 45%. Okay, so people need to go as high. The minimum they need to rise is 45% for the event that is coming. But this event that's coming is not about the 5D of the separation of the earth, or like my vibration is now going to go somewhere else. It's nothing like that. All of that sounds great, but it's very woo-woo. It's very, very simple. And I don't know, do we want to go here on this at this
Let's go
episode?
there. Let's go there. Tell us what your
Well, about 2/3 of the world population in 20 odd years, they will be going off planet. There is some true aliens. You see, really going to that, you need to also appreciate that the history of the earth, humanity, who are we? Where do we come from? And so this is all information that's come from Charlie to me. 500 million years ago, we were simian apes, sort of. And then some true humans who came to this earth for their own purposes. They wanted gold, they wanted some magnesium. They had this idea that they would give some of their DNA to these simians. So they gave them, they spliced 1.5% of their DNA with the simians. And that is what has changed us. And we are the same as every other animal, even the worm on this earth, but we're just slightly different. And that slight difference is why we are where we are today, is that 1.5%, which is propelling us beyond. I mean, there's a lot more story. You talk about the goodies and the baddies, okay? And all of that is in here as well in this story. I call them the critters.
okay.
But we're pretty much on the same level. So there was this progression of development in humanity as we gradually became more and more human. It was about 110 million years ago that we were still covered in fur. We still had a tail, and around about that time, part of humanity separated. Some went to the sea, some stayed on land, and we gradually began to change and change and change. Today we are as we are. The ones who went to the sea, today we know them as the dolphins.
Mm.
Which when Charlie first told me that, it did my head in, okay? So then I decided to research this, and I realized nobody knows. We actually know nothing about this. But the whales are actually divided into two types. One is the dolphin ones, and the other ones is the baleen whales, which they sieve plankton and shrimp. Whereas the dolphins, they like to have a nice munch, so they got teeth. But the dolphins, they're cousins of ours, but they went at a tangent and they developed into the sea, whereas we stayed on land. So for people who are listening, be kind to whales. They're our cousins. And they're as intelligent as we are. But we are intelligent cerebrally. They're intelligently emotionally.
Mm.
They have emotional intelligence, whereas we've got mental intelligence. So anyway, so that takes us to the present. And there's this big cataclysmic event happening, and humanity is divided into. Sorry, I'm hogging the whole thing. I'm just
Okay.
telling you stuff.
That's okay. Carry on, carry on. This is interesting. I'm interested.
Okay, so so just like we have soul fragments, And just like Charlie is itself a fragment of, Eric is a fragment of Charlie, and Charlie is a fragment, etc. So there are soul fragments that come into human beings initially. And what that means is these soul fragments, they have to learn how to be in a physical body. Our bodies, they're very convoluted. It's like driving a car, except we're much more complex. And we need to navigate instinctive fear. We need to navigate the way that our minds will protect us when we're damaged emotionally. And so these very young souls, they come into a physical body and they're narcissistic, they're psychopathic, because they don't know, they haven't learned the connections, they haven't learned how to deal with emotional trauma, and their parents themselves are narcissistic and traumatized, etc. So it's a vicious cycle, and we're all stuck in it. And it didn't used to be like that, but over the last 13,000 years, it has become like that. And so there is a proportion, roughly it's about a third of humanity, who are very young souls. The other 2/3 are much more evolved in the sense that they've been around quite a few times. And so the soul fragment knows how to drive the vehicle, except that we're born and damaged by the very society we come into, by our parents, the group, the belief systems. And unfortunately, we have to somehow, in spite of all that damage, we have to learn to handle the vehicle, the human body. We have to learn to deal with our fears. We have to learn to release the mental belief systems that hold us back, which we've picked up from other people. And it's a challenge. And this is why we're here right now, because, like I said, there's 2/3 of the world population who are ready for this. And when they were born, their souls already knew this is the challenge. This is the challenge. And the challenge is to wake up, not just to, you mentioned 9/11 as well, ditto. The same thing happened to me. That was exactly the same thing. But we need to wake up not just to the political disinformation, to the indoctrination that is all around us. We actually need to wake up to ourselves. We need to wake up to our souls. We need to wake up to our hearts. And that is the real challenge. But initially, we need to wake up to the disinformation around us. So that's step number one. But that isn't really waking up. That's just coming up to the starting line. Sure. Step number two is start to deal with your emotional angst, to everything, all the pain, all the suffering. Human beings have to learn about emotional intensity. I like the whole idea of the woke culture, because the woke culture is about, I don't want to experience any emotional intensity, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So what they're actually saying is, I want to stay weak. I want to stay weak-willed, and I want to stay emotionally stunted. That's what they're saying. And what we actually need is the opposite. We actually need to experience the emotions which are painful, because our nervous system is very, very tiny and weak. And through emotional intensity, we can build those wires so they can hold a whole lot of electricity to go through them. It is that emotional intensity that makes us good healers. And it is that, it also makes us a pain, but it is that emotional intensity that allows us to break free, to really connect with our hearts. the other day, even though I've done so much in my life, I was going for a walk with my dog into the forest. And I began to connect with Charlie as I was walking. But this time I was contemplating Charlie loving me. Now, my ego is one of those that I don't believe that I can be loved by others. So I go out to others and I give my love. How many of us are in that position?
Mm-hmm.
And this time I was focusing on Charlie and the realization that Charlie loves me. And I began to let that in. And as I was walking through the forest, oh, the pain in my heart. The sheer intensity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People cannot comprehend this.
Let me tell you something that while you while you breathe through that one. In my history with the emissaries and the information that they feed, twice I think it's three times maybe, what they've done is they have presented to me this feeling, and I can't describe it, and I can barely remember it. It was like this, what they say was they can only give me it for a very short space of time because it's too intense. We can't experience that level here. But what they described it as was the compassion of God, the compassion that God feels for us. Okay, that was the way they described it. And it wasn't, because I thought, oh, it must be love. And they said, no, it's the compassion that our Creator feels for us. And it was so overwhelming that each time they do it, I just burst into tears, and I've got no control of it. I can barely breathe. Just as you're doing with your body is exactly what happened. So I can relate very much to what, when you let it in, or when it comes in, wow, it stops everything except that.
Yeah, it is just like that.
Mm.
But this intensity was so, and after that, I mean, because this lasted about a half an hour.
Mm.
After that, I had a pain in my left shoulder. And so I didn't quite understand it. Honestly, I didn't understand it. And then afterwards, consulting with Charlie, he said, no, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And then I realized what had happened, that the intensity of my experience had released a vertebra within about the seventh, the heart is about the seventh at the back, the seventh thoracic. And if you ask most osteopaths, they will tell you that part is totally seized in people. But there's no point going there because you can't release it. There's no point, you cannot go there. You just focus on the periphery. And that's what it did for me. It released that. And after that, I noticed that after that pain, after 2 days, now my neck is a heck of a lot better. Mm. Because that imbalance at that level was affecting the imbalance higher up.
Sure.
Yeah. So releasing that, accepting that, it actually has made me healthier in a funny sort of way.
Lovely. Listen, there's something I just want to take you back a little bit and just run over a few things, because you were talking about the message that Charlie's
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm kind of relating it to the message that I've been given, and there's nothing that you said that makes me think, oh, everything is kind of pretty much in line. There are lots of messengers at the moment. People have got to wake up. We're in the Great Awakening. People have got to wake up. They've got to, I was downloaded a course to help people to start to ascend the ego, to get the ego out of where it was, because that's not not where it needs to be now. It needs to be elevated. So, and I'm absolutely fine on that. Just let me take you to this event that's going to happen. Tell us a little bit more about what you understand. You're saying 2/3 and a third. What's going to happen?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I tend to go off on a tangent.
That's fine.
So this is in March 2046, and it will be between either the 9th or the 10th. And I should say at this point, because this is a question of time, understanding time. Where, Charlie told me about the death of my mother in advance. He told me about 13 months ago, and he was 6 weeks out. And I was really pissed off with him, I have to say. And afterwards, so that led to a dialogue. And finally, I understood. And the thing about, and I'm deviating, but it's relevant. The thing about time is that the past is in a way fixed. It's happened. The future has yet to happen because it is put in potential. There are lots of different potentials. And that depends very much on the actions that people take. And so there's so many of us that what happens in my life, my actions are dependent on other people. My mother's death was dependent on the people that drugged her and killed her. Putting it nicely, she was in a lot of pain, but that is essentially what they did. They killed her. They could have killed her later, So in a way, bearing in mind that at the soul level, they're looking forward. Everybody, if you look at your lives, guys and girls, if you look at your lives, there will be moments you say, God, you meet people, you have certain experiences. There is a pattern there, which is like, this is not random. This is not just a mechanistic relationship in the world. There is an intelligence here. Our lives, they're like being choreographed.
Sure.
We meet, and the older you are, the more you get to see the relationships. So our lives are choreographs. But this choreography, from our perspective, has been foreseen at the soul level 8,500 years in advance. And even then, they cannot foresee the minutiae of everything that's going to happen, because this is a mechanistic world, but there's so many jigsaw pieces within it, that to keep everything tick-tock is impossible to foresee to the exact, even at the soul level, even though they're foreseeing what's going on 8,000, from our perspective, 8,500 years in advance, okay? So when Charlie first told me about this future event, at first, I accepted it. Okay, it's going to happen on the 9th of March. So when he got my mother's death wrong by 6 weeks, how can I trust this event? And what Charlie said is, the time scale is different. The planetary time scales, if you were to look at it from our perspective, 50 odd years from now, we're only talking about a week. So the chances of getting it wrong are pretty slim. Having said that, Charlie did say, well, it could be between the 9th and the 10th. So, okay. So I think that's a pretty done deal as far as he's concerned. And I now accept that and it is a done deal. And I've seen my death, it's okay. I can live with it. So the event is happening. Why would it happen? It's happened so many times before. We've had so many cataclysms on the history of the earth. So many. in the last 100,000 years, we've had 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not a biggie. Well, it's a biggie for us. It's not a biggie from the point of view. Anyway, so the reason why we're having this story is the souls, what happens to people. So 2/3 of humanity is destined to be lifted into these spaceships. Now, the spaceships, they belong to the true humans, and the true humans are here already. They're hidden. You know, we're talking about a race who is beyond our wildest dreams in terms of scientific discovery. You know, 15,000 years plus, whatever we could imagine in terms of, you know, we cannot conceive this. They have no problem being hidden from us. They have no problem being hidden. There is a race of aliens at the moment. They've been here, coming and going for the last, since the 60s. And they cannot see them either. They're hidden all around behind Mars, some of the moons of Jupiter, Saturn. They're in Venus. And we're talking big spaceships. We're talking spaceships which are 7 miles wide by about a mile thick. Each spaceship can hold 50-odd billion people. And there's 167 of these spaceships, which happens to be more than enough for the whole of humanity. Except humanity will not be there, because by then we will be reduced in numbers to about 6.5 billion people, according to Charlie. Initially, when he first told me, he said that we would slow down. Within 10 years, we would then have stopped. So like now, within 10 years from when he told me, which is another 7 years or so, we should be roughly around 9-10 billion people. But the numbers are going to remain pretty steady. Whatever the reasons, you know, I read between the sidelines maybe. But 2/3 will go, the 1/3 will stay, and the 1/3 that stay will stay because they will not have raised their level beyond the 20% of ego-soul integration. Basically, they're young souls. And to be able to go into these true human spaceships, it means that we need to be in a space of people whose level of soul integration is very high. You know, human beings, they find niches, and these niches tend to be according to their level of, how can I put it? We all create reality individually as well as collectively. I have my version of reality, you have yours, Joe blogs, the other ones, everybody has a version. And so people gravitate, and they find a space which reflects their level of consensus reality. Now, 98% of the world share a consensus reality, and that 2% of us, we're out in the sticks because our perception is different from theirs. Now, 2/3 of that world population has got to get their act together and rise up at least to 45 level ego-soul integration, because this is the minimum by which they can then be in the same space as the true humans, because their reality, their level of reality cannot engage with people whose level of ego-soul integration is really low. They're just different realities. You just kind of bring them together. One is based on fear, and the other one is based on love. And the two cannot mix. And so this is why people like you and I are here. We're here to help people to raise their level, because in 20 odd years, they've got to be at least 45%. That means they've got to deal with their pain. They've got to deal with their indoctrination. So initially, we began this conversation by you asking me about what I do, and I said, well, I'm 69, I'm semi-retired, and this is true. I do work with individuals, but I can only work with a few individuals. And what I am about is about working with a lot of individuals. Somehow, I need to get my act together and do what I never wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted this. Probably because I wasn't ready. And I'm still not sure that I'm ready. But somehow I have to work with greater and greater numbers to help them to open up their hearts, to deal with their pain, to build up their emotional stamina so that they can increase their capacity for feeling within their hearts. And that's what ultimately, that's what you and I are about in our own way, in our different ways, but that's what we're about.
Sure. Yeah. I resonate with everything that you said. Well, what's interesting is you tell the stories about the information you've been given. And you're probably aware of, the story of the Sumerian tablets is the story that Charlie told you. It's the same thing of, them coming here and upgrading the beings that were already here. The story of us going up. I mean, you're saying up to spaceships. The story of Revelation is about that. It's about Jesus, a divine being, coming down and taking away those who meet the standards, whatever, and leave behind those that don't. And then later on, he comes back down and he gets them as well. When they're ready. So there's nothing that you say that jars with me, is if to say, hang on, that doesn't fit into the paradigm that kind of the message that I get. I mean, I certainly haven't been. They don't get into date. The beings that give me information don't get into dates or anything. That's not their job. Charlie's obviously got a very different job. Mine have got a very different job, but the idea is, let's talk about it. Let's talk about where we need to go to, because we're going somewhere very, very, very special, and we need to get ready. So it's beautiful. I'm aware of the time, and I think we should probably bring the conversation to an end, just so that people don't. People have very fast lives at the moment, and pull out an hour and 20 minutes.
I'm happy to continue. You can always split it into two episodes.
And I'm also
unless you got something else to do.
I've got something else I've got to go to as well. But I'd be very happy we can have another conversation, because it's
sure.
It's fascinating. Certainly the stuff that you
Well, I need to hear more about you. It's all been about me.
Well, no, but that's great. I mean, I'm on my channel, I talk about me all of the time, so it's lovely to have somebody else talking about them, and certainly validating a lot of what I'm told, you validating through your sources as well. And then maybe we can talk again, sure, and we can have more of a kind of a to and fro. Yeah, but it's been absolutely fine, fascinating, lovely. And I understand the job that you were being presented with, and it can be overwhelming. And I had the same, and I have the same feeling about the job that was presented to me. It was a little bit overwhelming, and I didn't know if I was up for it, and I didn't know if I wanted to do it, and things like that. As time goes on, you kind of warm up to it a bit, don't you? But Sal, it's been fascinating talking to you, and definitely we'll do this again, yeah, so that we can.
Okay. Where are you living in Spain?
I live about 40 minutes from Madrid, from the center of Madrid.
I was wondering, because you've got all these central heating, so you're quite high up.
It's cold here. In the winter, it's very cold, and in the summer, it's very hot. We live extremely. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Well, Gordon, yes, it's been lovely speaking with you, and hopefully we can, and at some stage, maybe we can even do something in Spanish for the Spanish market.
That would be lovely. Yeah, I think the Spanish viewers would love that. Yeah. Yeah, the more we spread the message, the better. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, Sal. Right. Well,
it was very nice of you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing everything.
Take care for now.